just to the computer. So Lydia, hi. Thank you for joining. For everybody else, meet Lydia. Lydia and I have known each other for, I don't know, more than 10 years through various organizations. And I thought it might be useful for her to come on the show and talk about what it is that she's into and why. So Lydia, I noticed you've got a newsletter online. How did you get started with that? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, it's called Dislabelling because I noticed that we like to put people in the boxes and give them the label so we feel safe around them. We know who they are if we label them. And I like to do it as well, very much. And because I live with a disability, without me trying, I got so many labels already. And when I try to get rid of them, it's kind of difficult. So I decided to start writing some of the stories from my life or what others who have disabilities experience around me to kind of bring those labels closer to people and to show that we all have some, and it would be much better if we could get rid of them.
So when you say labels, can you give me an example of what you mean, just for if it's not obvious?
Labels like we like to think that if somebody is disabled, that they are less capable. We already have an assumption, it's like associations that that you see somebody who is fat, they are probably for sure lazy. We see somebody who maybe makes too many pauses when they talk, or we think that, or maybe they are slow in their thinking. We make these assumptions, we attach the labels.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And we do that as well in business, don't we? Because rather than seeing the individual, we look at their position.
Yeah, for
right.
sure.
So who's that? That's the chief finance officer. No, there's a name there. That's just what they do. But yeah, I can understand and relate to if someone's thinking too much, then they're talking slowly, so they must be slow. When in reality, it could just be that they're picking their words carefully, or they're just having a rubbish day with their minds somewhere else. All right. Okay. So obviously you've mentioned that you're living with this disability label. So what drove you to start a newsletter about it, or is that the start, or is that the tip of the iceberg that we're not really seeing?
It's a tip of the iceberg for me. Like I didn't talk about my disability, or I didn't speak about it for many, many years. And I realized that it was actually hindering my life to not talk about it. And actually, the fact that I was pretending that I don't have any issue or problem, or that I don't have any disability, it's actually robbing me to be more authentic, to have better connections with others. So it's a tip of the iceberg. It kind of stemmed from the need to, it's probably not the right word, to educate others, because I don't like that kind of approach. But at the end of the day, I realized like it's actually necessary for the others who never came in contact with anybody who has any disability, which is funny. I don't think that person actually exists, but they think they never came across to it. So to speak about it publicly.
So they wouldn't know. So when you mention education and people talk about awareness, I think it's quite important, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And when people find themselves in situations which they don't know how to deal with, and it doesn't necessarily just apply to meeting people with labels, it's also, whether they're aware of who they are, as you mentioned, as a for a long time you've talked about not acknowledging that particular label, and as a result, it's led you down a path to live a life which I suppose must have been really quite challenging, right? I mean, if you're not allowed to be your true authentic self, or you perceive yourself as not being able to be your true authentic self, then that's got to be quite stressful. So, I mean, how did that affect you growing up? When did you come to this conclusion that it's fine to accept yourself, and actually it's required, not fine, but required to accept yourself?
Like it was a, I think, interesting development, because when I was really like a small child, and I'm talking like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
like I never thought about like there is something quote unquote wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
I thought like everybody has something and this is just me, and I never had any problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I attended school kindergarten for disabled children.
Mm-hmm.
So I never knew anything else
Yep.
but other disabled children, and
Mm-hmm.
exercises and
Mm-hmm.
treatments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then my mom decided, because she was a teacher for disabled children, and
Uh-huh.
she didn't want me to become like a teacher's pet when you are in a school where your
Uh-huh.
mother is a teacher.
Yeah.
So she kind of came to the conclusion that it would be okay to put me in a school for quote unquote, again, normal children, which
Uh-huh.
is a weird, again, label, but that's how we
Uh-huh.
always distinguish that if
Mm-hmm.
something is other than the mainstream, it's not
Mm-hmm.
normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't have such a severe disability that it would prevent me not to be in
Mm-hmm.
a school with any barriers. So I
Mm-hmm.
just went to this school, which was close to my home. And that's first 2 years I had like happy, normal childhood as everybody. But then I had another teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and that teacher thought that she's going to educate others about disability through
Right.
me.
Uh-huh.
And she started pointing out my flaws, like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, be careful around Lydia because she can't do this, and
Mm-hmm.
she needs to be careful about that. And that kind of ruined it for me.
That must have been quite, I mean, those are your formative years, right? So that must have been quite upsetting as a child to for someone to come along and point out the difference. I mean, in terms of diagnosis, you mentioned your mother. When was she told? Was she told by the doctor? How did this
Like
awareness come?
I was born premature, but I
Uh-huh.
was released from the hospital after a month. Like I should be like okay,
Mm-hmm.
no problems with me.
Mm-hmm.
But because my mom, she was already educated, and she was
Mm-hmm.
before I was born, she was a teacher for disabled children. She noticed when I was like 6 months old that I'm not really developing as I
Mm-hmm.
should.
Mm-hmm.
So she just went to the doctor to check on me, and
Mm-hmm.
they started testing, and they said like, wow, it's probably cerebral palsy. And that's where it all started. So my mom was quite devastated
Mm-hmm.
because it's unlike, like, I think every parent who gets a diagnosis of their child that there is something wrong with them
Mm-hmm.
um, are devastated. But my mom, she understood the scale of the diagnosis and all
Yep.
of the implications. So
Mm-hmm.
I think she was very, very stressed on how she's gonna mitigate that,
Yeah.
because with the cerebral palsy, and I think with all diagnoses, but
Mm-hmm.
if it's something along the lines which is not inherently deteriorating diagnosis, like I don't know, multiple sclerosis or
Yeah.
any other
Mm-hmm.
like that, you try to mitigate it and improve it in the childhood as much as possible. So she went on this quest to to kind of cancel as much as possible, and exercised with me 5 times a day with this Voitas method, which is a method, quite painful method, where you need to stimulate certain points on the body to trigger the creation of the new neurological pathways. So the connections between brain and the body form new, because the cerebral palsy is conditions where certain parts of your brain are damaged due to lack of oxygen or basically anything which happened shortly before the birth, during the birth, or after the birth.
Okay. And so that's a pretty heavy thing to have to do that 5 times a day to your young child, right? I mean, that's especially as it's, I can't think of a better word to put it, but it's basically inflicting muscular pain on your child, so that the brain remembers that part of the body, knows that that part of the body exists, knows how to use it, and develops a new pathway in the brain, right? Keep me honest here, that's ultimately what's happening. So that's pretty hardcore, right? That your mom's having to do that 5 times a day. I can only imagine the challenge there. But you know, hats off to your mother that she's willing and was willing to accept a diagnosis and to do something with it, right? And I think that that's something that a lot of people, certainly when I think about the experiences I have with disabled family members. So my grandfather was in a wheelchair, after paraplegic after a car accident. My aunt had Down syndrome, and so the treatment was in society was always kind of, you know, they're different, and different was bad. So, you know, skipping back a bit, so you know, you went to a mainstream school as opposed to the so-called special or disability school. And you mentioned this teacher's pointing out those differences. How did the other kids react to you at that point?
That's actually when the children started to kind of back away from me, because that kind of pointing out there is something different and kind of unknown, because I don't think it was explained to the kids appropriately. They started to be scared and very cautious around me, and actually I lost a lot of friends or just playing during the breaks at school, because people or children were afraid. And so that was a rough for me. And actually another interesting phenomenon came out of it, that the children started to point out the difference and actually started to laugh at me and started to bully me around it, you know.
And it's interesting that polarization started probably with good intent from the teacher, who I would hope was good intent, but didn't have any clue on what the repercussions or consequences of that are. And I think we can see that in, if we fast forward back now to today, we see that polarization when we're pointing out or raising awareness on people with disabilities or whatever label, that, you know, we're demanding inclusion. And I think mostly what I see is that we're raising awareness of the issue, illness, disability, for I think of 3 labels that I can think of right now. We're not actually looking at it from the perspective of human, and we're not looking at it from a perspective of ability. We're looking at it from the negative context. And that polarization seems to be, in my view, either, you know, living in 2 silos, right? So you're either aware or not. And then this one over here, where the action to mitigate or to start, integrating an equitable existence for everyone, which is what we should be doing anyway, is missing, right? There's this big gap. And so the solution to solve that gap is obviously more of this one, right? More awareness. And it's like, well, not really more awareness, more action, and more, as you say, education for people to think beyond the status, think beyond the job title, think beyond the label. And they say job title as well because people are also very resistant to see a human being behind something. And if you look at childhood as an example, I went to what can only be described as a mixed race school, and I had no idea. And you see that now in child experiments as well, where you put kids into a different room. They don't know what racism is. They don't know what that person color is, and it doesn't matter, right? It's like we're educated or programmed at some point to see the differences as opposed to seeing the commonalities. And this is something I experienced and why I also wanted to talk to you. When we're forming teams or leadership teams, sometimes the most simplistic request, asking the people in the room what they have in common, is the most challenging for them. It takes the longest because that's not something that they're used to doing. It's not second nature. We're always looking for differences. And I think if we acknowledge those and spend more time focusing on the non-different, then that might be a little bit more conducive for everyone, right? All right. So we've talked about childhood. What was it like? What would you say your biggest challenge was between childhood and entering the workforce?
I didn't know like I didn't call it like a challenge. I just wanted to like fit in. And that's where I started to like ignore that I would be any different than anybody else. It's actually the moment where I started to kind of ignore that I need to exercise and I need to exercise a certain way and support the disability so it kind of contains itself and doesn't blow out of proportions. And funny enough, even though I try to ignore that I'm different, I love, for instance, dancing. And in a high school in Slovakia, it is like very common that you learn how to dance like a ballroom. So when you're at some ball later, you know how to do some basic stuff. And of course, like I wasn't the best dancer on the floor, but I was good. And I know music, so I was relatively okay dancer. But actually, my classmates never wanted to dance with me. So it happened to me, for instance, that somebody came to me to kind of catch the rhythm, and then they went away to dance with somebody who they wanted to dance with. It was kind of like thanks, but no thanks. But I wanted to continue dancing, and my mother recommended me somebody who was doing similar dance classes in their school, and I went there. And from there, I started to do also like competitive wheelchair dancing. And that kind of kept me in shape regarding my disability, but I was still pretending like I'm doing all the like quote unquote normal stuff. So I didn't discuss disability with anybody. I was just like, it was nothing I spoke about. I just pretended it doesn't exist.
All right. So you end up having this secret persona.
Yeah.
That's a heavy burden to carry, isn't it?
I think it prevented me to have truer friendships and deeper relationships. And it always kept me like on the outskirts of the group because I always had this kind of things I didn't talk about. Yeah.
So if we come back to wheelchair dancing, you focused on that professionally, and I know we've discussed this before, but you traveled the world with
Yeah.
that, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important that we mention it now. So tell us more about that. Tell us about that time.
It was wonderful because I was in the like best shape of my life. I was doing something I really loved because I love everything related to music. Um, I felt like I belonged to some group because I was going to this club and there were many people who are non-disabled and many people who were disabled. It was actually first time since the kindergarten I was around any other people with disabilities. And it was really great that I got to travel with them because I was exposed to different cultures, different places, which frankly, at that time, which is more than 20 years ago, I went to Japan, Tokyo. None of my none of my classmates when they were 18 went to Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
Like it was not very common. I don't think it's still very common.
No.
I went to Russia, I went to Warsaw, Hungary, Netherlands. It was great because you also get to experience like how other people live in those countries. So that was cool.
So in terms of culture, but also in terms of accessibility, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
traveling is obviously a challenge that people either relish or don't, right? And then when you're carrying this label or hiding this label, that also means that you've obviously got to think maybe much more ahead, right?
Yes.
So where would you say in the world, from your experience, had the, I'm not saying easiest, but probably the best accessibility experience for you?
I will say something probably controversial because I don't think there
Okay,
is
it's us.
any country I've been to,
Uh-huh.
which would have like super smooth transport. I think Netherlands is pretty good. Germany is pretty good. Um, but even like we consider Japan to be like this high technical and very advanced, and also with the disability they have like braille everywhere and so
Yeah.
on. But even though, for instance, I attended like a world championship and there were like so many countries, many disabled people, it was like horrible experiences because we were in a former Olympic village.
Yeah.
And they didn't have wheelchair accessible toilets. During the competitions, you could use the toilets, which were like when you see some work grounds and there are these
Oh,
toy.
these portable one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the portal that was like the toilet on the world championship next to the main dancing hall. It was, so many things were terrible. And I'm sure like if you are in Japan and you are on a wheelchair and you just travel through the uh, normal days, it's not so challenging maybe because I saw like the surfaces, everything is like very flat and accessible. But when it comes to this particular competition, I think it was very badly managed.
Yeah.
And for instance, the I forgot the English word, how you call their king,
Yeah, they're emperor.
the emperor, wanted to see the competition, and nobody, of course, due to safety, was informed.
Uh-huh.
And at some point, they just closed everything because the emperor came and it was closed. Nobody could come in and out of the building for like 1.5 hours. And imagine you have various disabilities. People
Sure.
need the toilet and so on, and other care. And we were so shocked. It was very unpleasant situation.
I would say you're being very diplomatic there. I would say that was quite humiliating.
Yeah. And that's actually something which happens a lot, I think, to the disabled people, that they find themselves in the situations which are kind of degrading and lacking dignity.
Yeah.
And basically the only thing you can do is to just pull through with it, because there is like no other option.
Isn't that sad though? I mean, when you think about it, basic human rights, a right to dignity. I mean, it's in the UN Charter everywhere. And I don't suppose that the world has changed too much when I think about it, because the latest Paralympics in Paris, the metro is completely not even the most basic form of wheelchair accessible. It's not. But what they did do was spend a small fortune on buses, which is okay. You know, they're trying to compensate for that. But, you know, I was thinking to myself, how long have they known that the Olympics are coming? And you always see that there's a focus on the Olympics, and then there's the Paralympics event that happens before. And it's almost like, I understand that the competitive fields are different. I get that. But it's like, why would you not invest in your infrastructure as part of that bid? And it just says to me that their priorities are somewhere else. And I'm not saying that you should absolutely go out and spend an absolute fortune on accessibility like that. I'm saying that you need to have it, especially if you're hosting the Paralympics. I mean, that's ridiculous. Then also, a couple of things there. If we said to someone who didn't require accessibility issues, let's use that label, right? Or to use your label, someone normal, and we tell them, hey, by the way, you can't use the metro today. You need to take the bus, which is going to take you 45 minutes longer. How are they going to feel? Well, probably they're going to write something on social media. They're going to create a stink. They're going to complain, and they'll get compensation for it. But if the situation is different, well, you know, it's almost like people should be grateful that we've done something extra for you. And I think that's the problem, right? That's I'm doing something special for you because you're special. Well, I think every mother thinks, every father thinks their kid's special in some way because you love your kids, right? Even the word special is about great, unique. Well, everybody is. So, you know, when we talk about dislabeling, it's a whole kind of metaphorical, political correctness issue where people are maybe frightened to say what's the right thing to say. You know, I don't know, and they trip over and they feel awkward, so the social interactions are awkward. It's like such a complex issue that you can't necessarily simplify it down to a generalization. I think we need to look at it from and goodness me, here's a word, equitable situation where, you know, I read an article, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, where, you know, disabled people are fighting for equity. And I think, you know, the whole, you know, diversity, inclusion mindset, as I mentioned earlier, is about polarization of this diverse population's rights. And it's like you've just polarized everybody and put them in a box without thinking about the simplest complex. I remember discussing with you in one of our chats the only way for an individual to go up onto a stage and achieve and receive their award was to be unceremoniously carried up the steps.
Yep.
And you're not telling me that the organizers didn't know that person was going to receive an award. Somebody knew, and they didn't decide that morning. And you know, I think about the times with my grandfather where the only way into the theater, if we went there, was through the backstage by the trash bins, whereas everybody else gets to go in their finest clothing in the front door, and it's kind of like, well, I can't think of any other word than disgusting, humiliating, degrading, and pointing out that you're different. Everybody's different. And it's not dismissing the needs, and it's not dismissing the I think that's what people are worried about, right? When we talk about everybody's different, we don't want to demean anybody's situation. That's not what it's about. It's about understanding that, or even asking if you don't know. When we're running our programs, like, does anybody have access requirements? You know, what do you mean? Really, do I have to? And it's sad that, you know, is anybody in a wheelchair? Is anybody able to focus? Are we able to focus for 8 hours? Do we need extra breaks? Or is there an accessible toilet nearby? All of these things from experience are necessary, but not everybody is even aware that they should even consider that.
Yes.
Right?
And I noticed also that even the buildings which claim nowadays that they are accessible, and you see like the blue sticker for wheelchair access and so on everywhere, that whoever is suggesting these, they probably never went through that suggested pathway themselves on the wheelchair, or they didn't have anybody on the wheelchair try what they are suggesting. Because I was recently with somebody on the wheelchair accessing the building, and of course, like, everything looked accessible, but then when you enter the lobby, then there was a tourniquet which are, you cannot pass them through if you are on a wheelchair. So you, even though everything seemed okay, you need to take the person from the backside again. And that person needs to be pushed because they cannot open the door themselves. They need to go through like catacombs almost, and then they land where they're supposed to. But I'm wondering, like, what is missing? That, of course, on the paper, it looks like, yes, we ticked all the boxes. This is accessible. The doors are wide enough and so on and so on. And then one tiny thing stops you in all the so-called good intentions.
Yeah, it's like the disabled toilet door where you press the button and the door opens out the way.
Yes.
Well, how do you get out of the way fast enough before the door opens? You know, much easier way would just to have a sliding door, which you start. I've become more aware of those since becoming a parent and having to push the kids in their pushchair around, which is not the same as being in a wheelchair, but you know, it's still accessibility. So there's I think a long way to go on that. And of course, you know, it's like anything, when you're designing a building to be accessible, the person you should probably ask is the person that you're designing it to be accessible for. But that might require a little bit of holistic thinking or a little bit of extra effort, which might not be in the budget, might not even be considered, because, you know, I can look at accessible building standards. What's the labor code, or sorry, the building code saying, and I can follow that. But that assumes that the person who's written the building code actually knows. So assumptions are, as you know, always very dangerous. That's why they're spelled the way they are. But when we come back then to you know, your daily life, if you don't mind, we can get into that. We talk about accessibility, so let's talk about inaccessibility. What sort of simplistic things do you come up against in your daily routines that might, you know, people might have never considered?
For me, like, the biggest problem are the Bratislava's pavements. Because for instance, I work in a building which around the building immediately it's okay, but as soon as you step outside of the perimeter of the building, everything is like broken. So I was going to the to work literally by taxi every day, which I went to the office because I had two options. One, just walk a long way through the many very, very broken pavements,
Mm-hmm.
or to go by like a fire staircase, which is also not great, because it really steep staircase with the
Yeah, I mean, it's not designed to be used on a daily basis. The clue's in the name,
exactly.
right?
So and in around me, also around where I live here, I think 25 years, I haven't seen one pavement around this area fixed. So you can imagine in what state they are. And I just wonder how come that more people are not complaining, because this is influencing, mothers with the pushchairs, elderly people. This is affecting more disabled people, and judging just by how many cars with the disability sign is parking around the building where I live, there's quite a few. But I'm always stunned that I think the people with disabilities are so kind of numbed, that they just don't create riots, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So
It's
yeah.
almost a state of apathy that it isn't going to change. So, and also, I've got bigger issues on work, employment, which,
Yes,
I'm not sure
exactly.
we've got time to get into that today. But when I think about, um, even where I'm from the UK, and I think it was in the 80s and 90s that local authorities started to take these things seriously, because the influence from America on individuals holding councils or local authorities liable for trip and fall hazards. And when I came to Slovakia, which is it's about 15, 16 years ago now, or maybe more actually, I was amazed. It's like, there's no way that pavement or sidewalk, whatever you want to call it, could be safe. I mean, that would never be okay. And in some cases, for me, who I don't have any specific requirements on accessibility, but it was better for me to walk on the main road than it was to walk on the sidewalk, because of mud, trip and hazards that are there, that people go, oh, it's fine, you just step over it. Well, what if you can't step over it? What if you've got balance issues? What if you've got, well, you can walk with a stick. And the stick's just another leg that falls down the hole and trips over or gets stuck. So it's not about that. It's about just taking care of infrastructure, right? And that's obviously something that the government needs to do. And then we'll get into all of the political whose fault it is, and that's not what we're talking about. We're just looking at how that affects you on a daily basis. All right. And so, what do you think? So what do you think? There's obviously some decision-making differences that need to be happening, not just in local authorities in terms of infrastructure, but if we come into the job market now, what would you say needs to change in terms of thought process around inclusion of people with labels?
I would love that people who make decisions about hiring people, anything, they would don't see the disability as a obstacle which cannot be somehow mitigated, because
Right.
oh, I met with the opinion, which later I explained to that person that this is not the best approach, but it was suggested before I had a discussion with them, that people with disability would disclose the disability as soon as possible, and talk about it, and so on and so on. And it immediately disqualifies us in the eyes of the others, because it's perceived as a personal tragedy, which, like, of course, when you get a diagnosis which influences your health and everything, it is a tragedy. But for instance, like, my tragedy happened a long time ago. I learned to live with it. I don't cry every day because of it. So don't look at me as if I am some kind of a charity case. And I think most of the people have it this way.
Yeah.
and it totally blocks out the view that what do I have to offer. And I think I and many others, we still have so much other things to offer, but somehow the world sees a person only like how much output you can give.
Mm-hmm.
And people stop to think about the fact that there is not only disability influences our performance, but there are so many layers. And even if today I hire somebody who is completely healthy and capable, for instance, 25 years old, who like is ready to go, tomorrow that person may lose their parent who they were totally attached to and can fall into depression. And all my views on how that person is gonna improve the team because of they can give so much output is gone because something happens. And everybody have these like unfortunate events which are not linked to only their personal health, but life happens and
Yep.
everything influences us. So it always is a context with
Yeah.
every individual.
Context is everything, right? When it comes to employee performance, as you just mentioned, what's the difference? If you're
I
someone
don't
suffering from
understand.
depression and anxiety and nobody knows it, but it's still affecting their output.
Yes.
You know, somebody's in a wheelchair and, they get in and out of the building, they do their jobs, not affecting their output. What's the problem? And I think if people, a statement I've just made there can be taken out of context where there could be the perception that I dismiss that out of context. Absolutely not. I accept that that's existing and I work with what I've got.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's also an element of personal leadership. It's also individual, behavior and attitudes, but it's also organizational leadership and it's also institutionalization leadership, right? Where those behaviors and mindsets, that's what should be promoted towards the individual. And I guess that's why you've come up with dislabeling, right? And also I know that you've taken people head on where people are talking about my disability is my superhero persona. And I just think, isn't that just furthering the gap of polarization? Well intended, of course, but isn't, it's contradictory to wanting inclusion, but also highlighting the difference. And that's the contradiction that I don't get. Now, I'm not living with any particular label other than Fraser. But I do look at it from a perspective of, well, we're dealing with individuals here, and every individual is different. Everybody's got their own stuff. I almost swore there, but gladly I didn't. We've all got our own stuff. We've all got our own baggage, and that's going to affect how you are every day. And as you say, you could be, let's take the stereotypical ultra marathon runner who goes out and does this every day, is hitting productivity. They see these ones in LinkedIn, they're up at 5 a.m. By 5:15, they've cured world hunger. And now at 5:20, they're making their kids breakfast. And by 6 o'clock, they're ready to work. That person goes out and sprains their ankle, then or breaks their ankle, and then they can't do that anymore. So does that make them less valuable? Of course not. It's their ankle will fix. Sure, but we shouldn't be looking at it as a person can be fixed or can't be fixed. I guess it comes to the mindset where if you have a disability, you must be broken.
Mm-hmm. We spoke about it with my friends who are very impacted by disability, whether personally or indirectly by somebody else in the family. And when we compare disability to other labels which exist, we came to the conclusion that, disability is always something health related, and it's usually that you have some disease.
Yeah.
There is a lot of load attached to being sick. You are sick, you cannot perform. And even if you look at the social hierarchy, and you see other, for instance, minorities or underprivileged groups, being sick is totally at the bottom, because that's like nobody expects that you give any output because you are sick. You know?
So from a societal point of view, how do you think we shift that focus from viewing disability as an illness or a limitation and recognizing the ability? How do you think that happens? I appreciate that's not an easy question.
I don't know how that can be shifted, because I think behind the kind of ostracization of the disabled in some way, or kind of putting it on the side, is the fear of every individual. If they are reminded that this can happen to me, you know. People getting stroke at any point of their life, getting sickness at any point of their life. It is like, for instance, I can imagine that I would be a father and I would have a daughter. So I can be a feminist because I will be supporting my daughter in some ways. I don't know now, but I can speak and talk about it, but I don't have to do anything particular around that area. I just can claim. But if you are suddenly impacted by disability, even indirectly, so I'm a father, my daughter gets sick or is born disabled, then how am I going to mitigate her life? Like, how am I going to help her to live her life to the fullest? And suddenly I have to do something. Like, if I'm claiming as a father that I'm a feminist, I'm not going to run around my male friends and talk about feminism. But if I'm gonna go to visit my friends with my daughter who is on a wheelchair, for instance, or whatever, I need to make sure that she can get there. And it can happen. And I read so many stories and articles of the parents who have a disabled children, that their child doesn't get invited to the birthday parties, to any party, because other parents are like, oh, we don't know what to do, so we rather not ask, and we kind of pretend it doesn't exist.
And when we say it doesn't exist, we're talking about a child or a person, and I think that in itself is awful, more than awful, catastrophic to the self-confidence and belief of anybody. When we're, the paradox of promoting disability as a superpower, but no one wants the superhero at the birthday party, and it's awkward. And I guess that people don't like having awkward conversations, and there's a simple way to have an awkward conversation, is to say, look, I feel quite awkward, but I'd rather know, and I don't want to offend you, I just want to understand, what do we do in this situation? What can I do in that situation? And I'm not sure if that's a reflection on individual level or organization or societal, but I think we've gotten so accustomed to not having meaningful conversation, or not challenging something, not questioning something, or not even seeking to understand something unless it's smack bang in the middle of our face and relevant to me. Now, we're not asking the world to go out and do everything, all the research. We're not asking that. We're just simply asking to talk to the person and say, well, what can I do to make your life more useful today? Right? And there's the question that it's like, yeah, that's a great question. That's an awful question, because it assumes that person's life isn't useful today. Yeah. And I raised that deliberately because, again, that's an example of good intent. What can I do to make your life better? He says, my life's not. There was a TV show I watched, I've forgotten the name of it though, and one of the introductions, is this sister, so this is my brother, I've forgotten his name, but this is my brother, he suffers with autism. And he turned around and he said, I have it, I don't suffer from it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it's like, you know, I used to get that with my aunt. This is my Aunt Jane. And then you go, oh right, yeah. As if she can't see that, oh right, yeah. And it's like, oh, oh, oh what?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, that kid's got Down syndrome. Uh-huh. And wow, that must be challenging. Yeah, aren't all kids challenging? Isn't parenting challenging? Yeah, but that's a different aspect. And the key thing is that all parenting is challenging. So those are the kind of confrontational questions that society really wants to back away from, and instead will take the path of least resistance and say that I'm a disability ally. And we've seen that with whatever minority group that you want to talk about. You know, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I've got the badge, I've got the sticker, I've got the, you know, that's saying something. But more importantly, actions are louder than words, right? So what action do you think anybody listening can take on what is an issue? And you know, I'm saying it's an issue because it is. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be talking about it.
I would love that anybody would speak up if they would come across to make any decisions regarding accessibility, to have it in mind, like, okay, I can make a decision about this accessible space. Am I making it for everybody? Like, is an elderly with crutches or a wheelchair user or whoever able to access it without constraints like the tourniquets, for instance. And I would like that people would not be afraid to strike a conversation if they don't understand, instead of like backing away and trying to like not see, or even I heard that on the playground, mothers are pulling their children away from other children who have visible disability, because let's be honest, there are invisible disabilities and you don't know. And then maybe your child is playing with somebody who has something, and so what? It is just the fact that something is visible, it's triggering the fear in a parent, and actually putting the other person who has a visible flaw into isolation. And we are setting up the people to have less socialization, less opportunities, less ability to develop social skills. And
I remember when you talk about that, I'm just recalling one of the times that, so I first met this individual who's quadriplegic through an accident at work. And you know, we're all turning up to this event. I don't actually remember what the event was. I just remember the moment where, you know, I meet everybody that I've seen before. They were all in the same training group. So was he. And, you know, they're all standing around and he's obviously in a wheelchair, and I'm shaking everybody's hands and I'm coming along the line, and obviously everybody's standing up, and then there's a gap where obviously he's sitting down and standing up. And I was watching everybody else kind of shake their hands. So they go shake the hands, hello, and then shake the hand. And I was sitting there thinking, well, what do I do here? Because that doesn't feel right. I should just say hello to everybody because of that one individual, or should I just shake everybody's hand? So I shook everybody's hand. And he's like, what are you shaking his hand for? He can't feel it. And I was like, do you mind that I shake your hand? And he's like, no, thanks, actually.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can pick up his hand. I can shake his hand. Like, oh, wow, Fraser, that was amazing. You thought that. And I was like, how's it amazing? It's just civil liberty. I'm not adapting my behavior or everybody else's behavior because of one, because that's just highlighting, that's discriminatory. I saw it as inclusive behavior. And even then I was left with a feeling of, did I do something wrong there by the look that I got from everybody else? That's why I was asking him, do you mind, Paul? Do you mind? He's like, no, don't give a damn. First time someone's done it, actually.
Yeah. Yesterday, I listened to a podcast where a lady with a muscular dystrophy was talking, and she was exactly talking about this, that she cannot now straighten her hand and
Yeah.
shake somebody's hand.
Mm.
So she was explaining to encourage people like, okay, shake my hand if we getting to know each other and so on. And it's again about the dignity, like you met with a full grown adult in a professional setting, and suddenly you kind of like everybody. I feel that it's amazing that everybody else didn't feel awkward skipping that person. It doesn't make sense to me.
And
But
again, it's again we're I think we're very focused on the me, and we get stuck there. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with focusing on me. What we're also forgetting is the us.
yeah.
And I think that the only way that that changes, and that's why I asked you the question, is to consider beyond the label.
Yeah,
right? And it's like, when you meet a blind person, do you make eye contact? Because they can't see you. Well, I would argue that they can feel you, they can sense you. So why would you make it awkward? Why would you just not go, yeah, okay, hi? And again, for anybody listening, I don't want you to think that I'm diminishing anybody's situation. I'm not. I'm just not promoting it. I'm promoting the fact that everybody has their own stuff. Inclusion demands we have an equitable approach to how we do things. And if that means a little extra effort, then that's what it is. And right now, if it's a case that my colleague in a wheelchair has to go in through the back entrance to the stage, then as a team, we're all going in the back entrance to the stage. Because that's what a team does, sticks together, right? So I think, we're definitely not going to solve the world today in the space of just over an hour. But I think it's, when I think about, your newsletter, when I think about what it is that you're talking about, we touched on your story as well. And I know that you're active in your workplace, but also probably more active in the social environment. And what I would ask is, if anybody's gonna take something away from this, or to do something, to take meaningful action after listening to this, what do you think that could be?
Be interested in people in general, because people reveal how they truly are only when they feel that they can trust and feel safe. And again, whenever you will have a chance to decide on something regarding the accessibility, or whether you have a chance to speak up on behalf of someone, because lots of people with disability are already at some point burnt out of always repeating themselves and asking for the same thing, which takes ages to implement. If you can advocate on their behalf, that's more than enough at this point.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, your newsletter, which, if people have not looked at it, it's called Dislabelling. We can find you on LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
So, that's how we've reconnected after that many years. And it's something that there's something I have to say about your newsletter is that every time you publish something, there's always a kind of a, oh wow moment, not like a light bulb moment, but there's always an oh wow moment, which sometimes is like, logically obvious, but also very hard hitting and emotional level, where when you're able to, and I don't know how you do this, but when you're able to relate that emotion and put it into words so that the reader feels it and lives it. And I think that that shared experience is something that everybody else should like and share. And I guess in the local arena here in Slovakia, if anybody wants to talk to you, they can reach out to you. How would they best contact you?
Through LinkedIn, or if you write me through LinkedIn, it will go into my email as well. So LinkedIn is the best way, and I'll reply to everybody. So
okay, oh, great. So Lydia, I'm just conscious of time. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your personal story. I know that that's something that not everybody asks you to do, and we're grateful that you've come along here and shared some insights. Any final comments before we end the session today?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being such a good host.
Okay, thanks. I paid you to say that, obviously. Okay.